the hard stop will be 7 o'clock, and hopefully it'll be 6:45. If earlier, we can do that, and we will do that. What? It's 4:45 now. I just, I want people to understand that we got to move some work here. If we can do it earlier, we will. First bill, we're going to make this easy. That there are some amendments that aren't quite ready yet, so that's going to be a hold. That's SB 004, whatever. Let's go to bill number 2, SB 006.
Senate Bill 6, General Assembly Special Election to fill a vacancy in office. This proposed constitutional amendment, if approved by the voters at the next general election, alters the procedure for filling a vacancy in the office of state senator or delegate. It requires the governor to, immediately upon a vacancy in the office of state senator or delegate, if the vacancy occurs on or before a specified date, declare special primary and general elections to fill the vacancy. The special primary and general elections must take place during the regular statewide primary and general elections that occur in the second year of a term, and the governor must appoint an eligible individual to fill the vacancy until a successor is elected. The proposed constitutional amendment exempts a special election to fill a vacancy in specified office from the quadrennial schedule for the election of state and county officers. There are no amendments. There was some opposition at the hearing, and I believe this passed out of the committee last year.
Yes, true on all counts. I'll welcome a motion. Senator Lamb has moved favorable. Is there a second? Seconded by Washington. Discussion or debate on the bill? Please, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And generally, I like the idea of having an election to fill these vacancies personally. Just a couple questions. Was there any thought to, I think there was some of the testimony they wanted to potentially to fill all of them even after through some kind of mail-in thing. Is that something that the bill sponsor is interested in, or just want to leave that go for now?
I guess they didn't want the perfect to be the killer of good enough. So
okay, that's fine. I just wanted to see where you stood on that.
I mean, I'm open to that maybe in the future, but okay. I think for purposes of this, it's not a perfect solution. And I think that, just to be clear, that's where the opposition was coming from. I think the opposition would like to see a special election for everything, regardless of the cost. And so this is a measure to try to balance that.
Right. And the one other thing I think that could potentially be an unintended consequence is are on Senate vacancies, because most likely you're going to have delegates that would put in for that spot. So you'll be having one vacancy and then almost immediately creating another one right behind it if a delegate moves up. But I don't know how you can really address that. That's just kind of a thought I had to put out to the body.
It's a great question. Any thoughts about that? Not all at once. Senator Washington.
Thank you. So, Senator, that happens now. We've seen it in this body recently, so when there's a vacancy, someone becomes mayor, someone from delegate pops up. So we had that a senator became a mayor, then a delegate became a senator, and then another body, a senator, a delegate became city council president. So that sort of happens now.
One, and the other one would still be appointed the old way, right? So it doesn't quite live up to the purpose of having them actually all elected. Because if you're electing one at the presidential election, say your senator is elected at that election. Right. If it's after that, it would.
Then never mind.
Obviously, it does help. I'm sorry, Senator Washington.
No.
It does. instead of 3 years, it limits it to 2 years for the initial appointment and whatever's up.
Yeah.
If it is a delegate, it's a lot easier. As the Senate, you're going to have the same situation. It's true.
Yeah.
So I think, as Senator Lamb said, there's some more solutions out there we're going to have to work at, but this at least gets us away from the Central Committee selecting someone for up to 3.5 years. Further discussion, the bill has been moved, and Senator Riley.
Senator Lamb, the fiscal note and our discussion says the governor must appoint an eligible individual to fill the vacancy until the successor is elected. Do people just send their resume in and he selects one, or is it through the Central Committee like it is today? Under your provision?
I think it would still be through the Central Committee like it is.
Central Committee? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Question to the sponsor. So last year, I think this passed out through the Senate, and I know it got caught up in COVID, but have you gotten any sense that if we pass it in this form, it has a decent chance of getting through the House? In other words, is there some amendment that you think would help get it passed, or is this your strategy you're using?
I'm not certain. I think.
Does it have a crossfall?
know. What's that?
Does it have a crossfall? It's probably the easiest answer.
Yes, I think it does have a crossfall. I think
Okay,
it's
that's-
Delegate Moon's crossfall.
Okay, that's good enough.
Yeah.
So if a year out from an election, from the legislative election, the off-year election, there's a Senate vacancy, if the governor appoints a sitting delegate to the Senate seat, that's vacant. Then there's a process for the delegate, and a delegate is subsequently appointed by the governor via the Central Committee. So they would both be up at the subsequent election, the presidential election. So I'm trying to play out that scenario, Senator Gallion, that you raised. It might partly be taken care of. I'm not sure. I think we'll have to figure it out. But again, I think Senator Lamb said we're trying to at least make some improvement, which is no guarantee even with a House. Further discussion on the bill. Please, Senator.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought I was following you and everyone, and then I got totally lost. So this bill calls for, there's a vacancy, say, Senate vacancy. It would trigger an election if it's, how many years out from another election cycle?
If it's before the presidential election, they will stand for election in the presidential election, the off-year election.
Okay. So they would go through the same process, be nominated by the Central Committee and selected by the governor, and they have to stand for election during the presidential. Is that what it's saying? Okay. So I see heads bobbing in a different direction. So I see Senator
I think we all agree.
Yes, Ms. Goodman say
So
maybe not.
if the vacancy occurs 55 days before the filing deadline for the candidacy in a presidential election year, then the individual to fill the seat, it would be a normal election process. They would, they'd have to go on the ballot on a primary, they'd have to win the primary ballot, and then they would go to the general election to fill that particular seat. It would be in the special election.
So that 55-day period is up to 55 days before the filing
Right.
deadline.
So, I mean, that's the cutoff. If the vacancy occurred 56 days before, then they would be fine. But if, for example, 30 days before the filing deadline, the vacancy occurred, then it would be a normal appointment by the governor. So there's just a process, and then they have a special election, which is happening concurrently, similar to what happened with the special election for the 7th Congressional District. They just have a special ballot for that particular race. In this case, during the president election, they would have a ballot for the individual filling that vacancy.
Okay. So the special election is not separate from a regular recurring presidential election?
Not under the provisions of this bill.
Okay. So if a vacancy happens, say, 5 days into a new term, what would be the scenario with that? What would happen?
That would fall under the scenario in this bill. That would create a vacancy in the proper period, and they would have a special election, but that special election would not occur until the presidential election. So technically, the seat could remain vacant for the entire 2 years until the special election occurred.
Oh, so there's no
No,
temporary
I think
appointment?
I don't think it changes that provision. So I think the Central Committee would still fill that position, would still make a recommendation to the governor, and the governor could fill that position. It's just that that person, if they wanted to continue in that role, has to file for election in that presidential election.
Okay. So,
Yeah, that's the current process, yeah. And I see Jared had his little hand up, and you can't see it in that screen, but he had a little tiny hand up in this screen that he wanted to.
Are raising little hands. Jared, if you want to join us.
He has to be unmuted. Oh, he's muted. Jared, stand by.
Okay, great. I just wanted to, yes, so this bill, I just wanted to give it in some practical terms here with the 55 days. So the vacancy would occur if you do it after the gubernatorial election year. So a vacancy would have to occur somewhere from January 2023 to December 2023. That's the only time that this period would be allowed for a vacancy to occur in order for that office then to appear on the presidential election ballot. The Central Committee can still fill the vacancy for that position, but the office would then have to sit for election on the presidential ballot. If the vacancy occurred after December, and I don't know the specific date, but it's early December. If it occurs, like, say, December 26th or the 27th of December, then that vacancy would not sit on the presidential election ballot. The Central Committee would fill it, and it would just fill out the normal term. Basically, it's just shortening when the individual has to go in front of the ballot. But the constitutional amendment does not preclude the Central Committee from filling the vacancy with an individual until they sit for a special election.
We figured, we got that. Senator Washington.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to repeat that and make sure that that's what I understood. This just addresses the issue of keeping someone from serving 4 years. So someone's just elected, they decide to they get appointed to be the head of an agency, and then somebody comes into that position, and so that keeps that from going, or for whatever reason, it keeps them from serving 4 years. And I see it as like a retention election. Would that almost be the way not entirely, but it's sort of like they want to retain the seat, they have to go up again. So you get appointed, and kind of what we do with judges. They get appointed, and then they have to be retained. Because you have appointed. You have appointed. Okay, got it, yeah. So,
Okay.
but it's retention in that in order for you to keep the seat, you have to go up for election. And so it's just a regular election.
But Senator, it's really an open seat, in other words. I mean, in retention, you did something to have the seat. You might have been elected in some retention elections. This you're appointed in, some might say, a faux process, and but you actually go to the voters. So it's anybody's game, and I think anyone can feel they can seek that office.
Got it. Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Further questions? Okay. Seeing none, will anybody be voting against it? I'm sorry, Senator Washington, you have a question?
Oh.
Will anybody be voting against it? Okay, let's record Senate Bill 6 unanimous and send it to the floor. Next bill, please.
Senate Bill 169, Health Occupations, Podiatric Physicians. This is sponsored by Senator Patterson. And this bill alters the term podiatrist to podiatric physician throughout the Maryland Annotated Code. It requires the publisher of the annotated code to correct cross-references to the terminology and establishes that references to rules, regulations, laws, executive orders, etc. are to indicate the new terminology. There was opposition from the Board of Physicians and the American Medical Association. The former made 3 points in opposition concerning public notice. There is one sponsor amendment that seeks to address one of the Board of Physicians' concerns, and the amendment renames the State Board of Podiatric Medical Examiners to the State Board of Podiatric Physicians where applicable, and renames the Board of Podiatric Medical Examiners to the State Board of the Board of Podiatric Medical Examiners Fund to the State Board of Podiatric Physicians Fund.
Senator Patterson.
The chair, I've been working with these two groups, and I'd just like to request a temporary hold until I can give it one last try and see if we can take it through the central. No.
Special election.
Thank you.
No objection, that bill will be held. Next bill.
Senate Bill 175, Procurement, Performance, and Payment Security Requirements and Limitations. This is from Senator Ellis. This bill specifies that state or other public bodies may not require a contractor to provide payment or performance security on specified contracts until the time of contract ratification. It further specifies that the Board of Public Works may not require a prospective contractor or an energy performance contract to provide a guarantee of projected energy savings before the energy performance contract is ratified. There are no amendments.
Is there a motion? It's been moved by the Vice Chair. Is there a second? It's been seconded by Senator Fry Hester. Discussion? There are no amendments. Discussion? Does anybody object or want to share that objection? Seeing none, then the bill will be marked as unanimous and sent to the floor. Next, please.
Senate Bill 244, Maryland Funding Accountability and Transparency Act, Non-Budgeted State Agencies. This bill alters the Maryland Funding Accountability and Transparency Act to require that the Department of Information Technology update payment data on the existing searchable website on a monthly basis. The bill also requires non-budgeted state agencies to submit their payment data for inclusion in the website. Finally, the bill repeals obsolete language and makes stylistic changes. There are no amendments.
Right. No opposition listed in the bill file. Is there a motion? It's been moved, seconded by Senator Lamb. Discussion on 244. Discussion on 244. Seeing none, will anybody be objecting or voting against the bill? Seeing none, this too will be marked as unanimous and sent to the floor. Next, please.
Senate Bill 274, State Finance and Procurement, Chesapeake Bay Watershed States, Expenses and Contracts, the Quit Polluting My Bay Act of 2021. This bill establishes that if the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency identifies 2 or more pollution source sectors as requiring backstop levels of action of oversight for a state, 1, the Board of Public Works must, in the standard state travel regulations adopted by the board, prohibit reimbursement for travel expenses to a state official or employee for travel to that state. And 2, a public body is prohibited from awarding a procurement contract for goods or services to a business from that state that meets the specified conditions. And they're not naming names, but the state is Pennsylvania.
Senator Riley.
Thank you. Move unfavorable.
Is there a second? Second. Discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
We've had bills like this before in terms of competitive contracts. The big fear that the body has is retaliation. You know, a lot of Pennsylvania government people like to come to Annapolis or Baltimore. I'd hate to get into a contest of who can put up the biggest wall between the states. So that's why I moved unfavorable.
Will anybody be objecting or opposing the unfavorable? Seeing none, this will be marked as unfavorable, unanimously unfavorable. We won't build the wall. Thank you. Senator Simon-Ayer has asked to hold 284. Next, please.
Senate Bill 296, Election Law, Campaign Finance, Protection of Contributor Information. This bill prohibits a person from 1, using any contributor information from any report or statement required under Title 13 regarding campaign finance of the election law article for commercial solicitation purposes, or 2, publishing any contributor information from any report or statement required under Title 13 in newspapers, magazines, books, or other similar media for the purpose of facilitating commercial solicitation. There are no amendments, there was no opposition, and this unanimously passed the committee last year.
Is there a motion? Favorable. Been moved favorable, seconded by Senator Riley. Discussion, debate. Senator Washington, please.
Are we seeing an increase, thank you, are we seeing an increase in state expenditures or funding this? What's the current evidence around, this bill? Like, is it increasing? Is it getting out of hand? What problem is this fixing?
Let's get Senator Simon-Ayers on and Senator Washington's off.
Thank you. It was brought to my attention by the Board of Elections that this is a problem, and they requested to work with me to put this in to address this. Again, it reflects what they do at the federal level to try to protect against commercial solicitations of our donors. But Jared is on the line if you want to get specifics.
Jared, if you don't scream at us, if you have anything to add to Senator Simon-Ayer on that, we welcome it.
He said he's having a hard time hearing. That's what the issue is.
Okay. Further discussion, Senator Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Simon-Ayer, 2 things. First off, on page 1, lines 22, and then page 2, line 1, not to be used in newspapers, magazines, books, or other similar media. Would you have any objection to adding websites? I mean, that just seems a really big omission, and I don't know whether people would call a website similar to a book or a magazine.
I think they were trying to keep this in the same language as the federal law, but or similar media. I don't know that necessarily hurts.
Jared can hear us or not hear us? I think if someone were being fine-tooth comb here, I don't think they would think that a newspaper, magazine, book.
He's saying he can't hear.
Okay.
I'll text him the question.
Do you want to hold it until our next
No,
voting session?
let's do this, ladies and gentlemen. If there's no objection, let's add it, but we'll have a few more days, so if we find it really is a problem or conflicts, we can do a floor amendment.
To take it back out?
Yeah.
That works. And then the other question I had for the sponsor of the bill.
With the idea of adding websites as to publication, I'm fine with it, as long as it's not used for commercial solicitations, then yes, that's the key to this, to protecting the data.
Right. So Jared, my concern was that a website would not be seen as similar media, which is the language of the bill, as a newspaper, magazine, or book.
Yes, I guess I'm fine with that, like the idea of it for newspapers and everything else, because it's similar media and similar media functions with it.
Right. Okay, so that was first question. Thank you, Jared. Second question that I broached, and I apologize that the sponsor of the bill and I did not get to talk about this further. I mentioned that I asked about enforcement during the hearing, said that this was an issue that I worked on when I was a member of the House, and that I talked about the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, the federal level, allows salting of reports. And I was just wondering how it is that we would figure out enforcement, how we would find out someone violated.
So I wanted salting is a little bit different on the federal level than on the state level here.
Well, why don't you explain this? Hold it.
Should I describe what salting is?
Explain what salting is.
Okay. So salting is basically, it's sort of putting something into a finance report that is a gotcha. So rather than Susie Smith donating $50, I might put Fluffy Smith, and Fluffy is her cat. And so the cat clearly was not a campaign donor of mine. So if Fluffy Smith got a letter saying, do you need new aluminum siding, or do you want to sign up for my broadband service, or whatever, you would know that the source would be a campaign report and that would have been used for commercial solicitation. And then usually at the federal level, then you have to disclose that, okay, her real name is Susie, but I'm putting in Fluffy, and you pick 2 or 3 or something, and it's just a way. And because somebody who is interested in using a finance report for commercial solicitation, they know that they could get caught because there could be some salting in a report. So that's the tool. That's the enforcement tool at the federal level.
So the question is?
The question is whether salting would make sense, and how, if there is not going to be salting in this bill, then how would we enforce? How would we know that someone has used it? Because if Susie Smith gets an ad for broadband or for new aluminum siding, she is not going to connect it to a donation to someone's campaign. So how do you enforce?
Jared, you want to respond?
I just wanted to clarify about salting first. Salting on the federal level is not changing a person's name. It's not changing the itemized items. Under federal law, you don't have to disclose people that give under a certain dollar amount.
Right.
And that's where the salting occurs, where they add 10 names to their lists, and they have to disclose those 10 names prior to the submission of the report. I think that salting, since Maryland in general itemizes every contribution, we wouldn't, even the federal standards, you don't change a name of a contributor to that. They added those 10 names and assigned them unitemized contribution amounts. Here in Maryland, I don't think that it's necessary. I think that it's very similar to what we have on the voter registration rules and regulations, where you can't sell the lists. This would at least prevent the questions from those entities that have questioned us about downloading the entire list for solicitation purposes. And if that comes back, we would have the ability to go to the state prosecutor and say, entity X asked for the contributor list, and this person then received a solicitation with it. I think that this would be a good first step to at least help protect the information that is publicly available right now out there. I don't think that we need to go so far as for salting purposes, and it would create more burdens on treasurers right now. I think this is a good initial step here, and then if there's issues and further enforcement problems, we can address that through regs, because this would give us the ability to look at regs and.
Okay, Jared, I think we got the answer. Is that?
So, yes, so I think salting is done different ways, different times, and it's been decades that I've been a little, anyway. So, so no salting, and then I would just move an amendment to add on page 2, line 2, websites, or wherever that should go, Stacy, and move the amendment if there's a second.
Is there a second? It's been seconded. And again, I think it's with the, well, I mean, you can still check, but if there's any problem, we can do something from the floor. I'm sorry, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have a question and might require a follow-up. So commercial solicitation, that term, is that defined anywhere what that is in regards to this bill?
It's not defined in Maryland law, but it's got a very general use type of, easily understood meaning. Commercial solicitation, meaning that you are soliciting for the purpose of sale of an item or something similar. I'm not really sure that it needs a specific definition in our law.
Okay. So, okay, on a scenario, so I get a hold of Chairman Penske's contributor list, and I reach out to your contributors. Could that be construed as commercial solicitation?
You're doing it to sell your, for example, accounting services to those individuals, then yes, that would be a commercial solicitation.
How about just for political contribution?
No, because that's not a commercial purpose.
Okay, and that's clear in the law.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
That's done now, and that's going to continue. Further discussion, we're on the amendment now. Any objection to adopting the amendment? Seeing none, that's adopted. The bill is amended. Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, will anybody be objecting or voting no? Seeing no hands, the bill as amended receives unanimous vote and will be reported to the floor as such. Next.
Senate Bill 326, Senator Hayes, Baltimore City Community College Procurement Authority. This bill generally exempts Baltimore City Community College from most provisions of the state procurement law and from state oversight of its capital improvement program and information technology policies, standards, and procurement. There are no amendments. This is the same as the bill that was passed by this committee last year.
It's been moved and seconded. Discussion on the bill? Discussion on the bill? Seeing none, again, will anybody be voting against it, objecting? Seeing no hands, the bill passes the committee 11-0 and will be reported to the floor.
Okay. Senate Bill 347, Environment, Public Hearing and Notification Modernization Act. This is a departmental bill that modifies public participation and notice requirements for a number of licensing, permitting, and regulatory promulgation sections of the Environment article. Generally, the bill authorizes public hearings and meetings to be held using teleconference or internet-based conferencing technology unless an in-person meeting is specifically required by federal law or is requested by a person. The bill also allows public notices to be published electronically on the Maryland Department of the Environment's website instead of by publication in newspapers. The bill applies to authorizations issued for controlling air emissions and water pollution discharges, drilling of oil and gas wells, non-coal surface mining, constructing and operating solid waste facilities, sewage sludge utilization, and activities that would disturb Maryland wetlands and waterways. There are 2 amendments in your packet. The first is on page 5. This is by request of the department. It adds a definition for the term internet-based conferencing technology to specify that the technology must include a call-in number for telephones. The next amendment on page 7 of the packet is being offered by Senator Pinsky. This amendment specifies that the department must allow people on the list of interested persons for purposes of notices related to the appropriation and use of waters, dams, and reservoirs and non-tidal wetland permits to choose how they wish to be contacted. The bill had sort of taken away the law's requirement that it be mail notifications. The amendment would say that the people could choose whether they want to be contacted by mail, email, or both. The amendment also specifies the provisions authorizing the department to hold virtual meetings in lieu of in-person meetings during states of emergency only applies to states of emergency lasting 2 weeks or longer. We have run these amendments by the department, and they have no objections to them.
Okay, again, this is a department bill. Is there a motion? It's moved.
As amended?
No, just let's get the bill first. It's been moved and seconded. Was that a motion or discussion?
I second it.
Okay. Let's take the department amendment on page 6 or 5 and 6. This came from the department?
Yes.
Okay. Any objection to the amendment on page 5 and 6? Seeing none, that's adopted. Now we're on the Pinsky amendment on 7. I have a question, though. Does the bill make clear how interested parties are asked this question, if they want it by mail or electronic?
No, it does not specify.
In other words, if they're asked by mail, by electronic, it could limit some people.
Well, so the way it works now, it's true. It doesn't specify. I mean, I will say that the department indicated that it's their intent to continue offering mail notice to people. I don't know. It's up to you how much detail you want in there.
Mind 22. And any thoughts on that? Senator Washington.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that. Thank you for thinking about it, because it's sort of, it's saying may. And there's nothing that would keep them from only having online. And yeah, how would you notify people if they're not able to go online? So I see this, I see the problem. I definitely see someone raising it on the floor if we don't solve that. Because other bills like this have come out of finance and other committees, other quote unquote monetization options have come from other committees and other topics, and that question is always answered. So we should solve it, I think, before we take it to the floor.
How about if, in the amendment, middle of the page, the department shall allow each person, and then putting in some phrase after soliciting them by mail or something?
Well, but this is to get on the list of interested persons. Right. You have to have reached out. You have to have already proactively reached out to the department somehow. I mean, and that's the broader thing that the bill does, though, is that it takes away, right now, those notices are required to go into a newspaper that say, if you want to get on this list of interested persons. This would allow those notices to go online instead of being in a newspaper. That's a broader thing that this bill does.
Right. I mean, that by itself gives me a tiny bit of heartburn. But the people who are on the interested party list, do we want to be explicit that they must be reached by mail once to see whether they want to stay by mail or receive electronic?
So you mean for people who are currently on?
Correct.
We could do that.
Okay, yeah, I don't want people who are interested parties who don't have access to get slighted. So,
So what I would suggest in that case, because we're dealing with probably a fairly narrow category of kind of people who are already on this list, would be to put uncodified language saying that people on an interested party list as of the effective date of the act, like the department has to reach out to them by mail to request.
any objection to that uncodified clarifying amendment? Amendment to the amendment. Senator Washington.
I don't have an objection, so once we accept that, I
Okay.
have another
If
question.
no objection, that becomes part of the amendment on page 7. On the amendment, Senator Washington.
Well, it's actually now unfortunately on the bill, but I guess I'll speak to the
Okay.
amendment. We could do
Any
the
objection to
amendment.
adopting this amendment?
Yes, yes. Move favorable on the amendment.
Okay, no objection, it's adopted. Okay, the bill's amended. Other questions, concerns, possible amendments, Senator Washington.
Okay, so now I'm concerned about how does one become an interested person if the only way to become an interested person is through email or on the web, and it's not in the paper. So, in other words, there will be new people that could become interested if they read it in the paper. Do you get it? I'm just concerned the public notice. I guess it's about the public notice. So I don't recall is anybody on the department here, will they continue to post it? Is it that they want the option to do both? I mean, I could see both, but I'm very concerned about completely eliminating a non-digital way for people to become informed about public informational meetings or public hearings. Yeah. So I guess you were saying that's the larger issue here, and I apologize to the committee for not thinking about that a little more during the hearing, but now that I hear it all together, it's a concern.
And I will say that that's more broadly what this bill is doing, and people are focusing on this interested parties list, but that's a very narrow category of permits. I mean, this bill is broader than that, and it has to do with notice for a lot of different types of permits and things. Part of the department's argument is that, I think, let me pull up unfortunately we don't have the department here.
People would look on page 9 while Ms. Morton is looking at it. Line 14 says, at its discretion, and it used to say the department shall. So it had discretion, but shall. They now take out shall, make it may.
Well, no, that's at the discretion. The department shall require the applicant to do the public notice. There was always a public notice required by the department.
Right, but if you look at line 15 or 17, it says at least 1 day, but it's following the may. I guess I'm confused.
Which page are you on?
Page 9, line 14 through 17, or 14 through 20?
Right, so it's at the department, the discretion, the department shall either publish the public notice itself in a newspaper or direct the applicant to publish the newspaper. So the discretion was between whether they publish it themselves or whether they directed the applicant to publish it.
So then there will be at least 1 day's notice in a public periodical?
Not anymore. So now it's at the discretion, the department may, rather than the department shall. It used to be the department had to do one or the other. Now the department may do it or require the applicant to do it. So here's what the department said in response to questions that were raised about the newspaper. They said the internet notices wouldn't be a full replacement for newspaper notices, just another legally acceptable avenue for providing notices. I will highlight, though, that this takes away the requirement that they do public notices by newspaper. Now, they say the department would be judicious in deciding whether to use newspapers or the internet for publishing notices, as we recognize from experience that certain segments of the population do not rely on the internet for information. We have conducted informal surveys at public hearings as to how attendees learned about the hearing or public meeting, and not one single person has said via the newspaper. All have learned through word of mouth, internet, emails, HOAs, interest groups, etc.
Senator Washington.
Thank you. I like giving them the option, and so that they can, so it's legally permissible to use the website and to use the internet. But an amendment that I conceptually would be to restore these shalls. I mean, at least for a year, the next year or so or something, till we get some better data on it. Just simply make it in a may. We're going to be back here, and they definitely are not going to do it at some point. So I think it's in our interests to still require that there be something that is non-digital way of informing people about what they're doing in their communities. And you're right, it's not just about this one special interest group. It's a whole range of activities that this department engages in. So that's... Otherwise, I would move, I don't want to move unfavorable because I believe that we should advance technology, but we...
Well, before I call on Ms. Morton, I mean, that's a big part of this bill. I mean, it may be we just want to vote the bill down or put it in the drawer, but we should just think about where we want to go on this. I mean, giving them another year, not moving the bill is giving them another year this way. So do we want to give them the authority to begin to shift to non-newspaper based notice is the question. They've asked for it. We can say no, thank you, or come up with a creative hybrid solution. Ms. Morton.
Right. They can post this on their website now. They do post these notices on their website. The bill is to say that they could do that instead of doing the newspaper if that's what they wanted to do. I mean, there's other pieces of the bill. There are the pieces that have to do with the holding public meetings by teleconference rather than in person in some situations. But the meat of the bill is both the teleconference provisions and the public notice by website rather than by newspaper at the department's discretion.
Senator Washington.
I apologize. I don't recall if there's a motion on it, but for me, it would be unfavorable. If they're able to already use the websites, I would not want to support removing the option for putting it in the newspaper.
The bill before us is favorable on the bills amended. Let me just say this. This might not be the hottest topic or one that gets our interest, but we set the policy. So even if it's not anything you knew about, it's in our laps. So we can vote for it. We can vote against a favorable and then do an unfavorable. We can hold. I just, I just want people to understand. I'm sorry, Madam Vice Chair.
Chairman.
And then followed by Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Am I on? Page 13, lines 6 through 11. It says that they could be using teleconference or internet-based conferencing technology. These are for jurisdictional projects. So they could either use online so that everybody can access it, or they can only do an in-person hearing in just one of the counties. So there could be 5 counties in this multi-county project, and they could pick one in-person only hearing or informational session in a place that's not accessible to public transportation at a time that's not accessible, and nobody would be able to watch online because it says or. So I have a problem with that.
Okay. Is there any objection to holding this bill? I spoke with the Senate President today, and he said, look, we're going to have to prioritize. We have a lot of bills. I know we all feel pressured to move the bills, ours and our colleagues, but he said, we're not going to get through every bill. We can't spend time on every bill. We got to prioritize. So I don't think there's any driving force on this. It hasn't been the policy, so I'm going to suggest hold it. Whether it's a permanent hold or temporary hold, we'll decide later. But anyway, okay. Next.
Senate Bill 353, Veterans Benefits and Benefits Appeal Services Disclosure Requirements. This is a departmental sponsored by the Department of Veterans Affairs. This bill oversees the disclosure requirements for those providing benefit services to veterans. The bill requires a person who charges a fee for these veterans benefit services to provide a written disclosure statement on a form that's approved by the Secretary of Veterans Affairs and to obtain the signature of the person that's receiving these services. The bill requires that a written disclosure statement and an advertisement for appeal services indicate that a service recipient may obtain these services free of cost from either the State Department of Veterans Affairs or the Federal Department of Veterans Affairs. The bill also creates civil penalties for violation of the provisions and mandates that the revenue from those penalties be placed in the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund. There was no opposition and there are no amendments to this bill.
I'll entertain a motion. It's moved by Senator Riley, seconded by Senator Patterson. Discussion on the bill. Seeing no discussion, if no one will be objecting, this will be marked as unanimous and sent to the floor.
Super briefly for legal counsel before we get to the floor, can you just look into whether veterans benefits should be veterans S apostrophe just before we pass a law that has bad grammar on it? I would be mortified. Sorry? It's a Scrabble word, even though we don't do apostrophes, but it is possessive. The benefits are owned by multiple veterans. So if you could just have our proofing people or something look at that. Thank you.
Okay, I want to go over some schedule things, and then we'll spend some time on the climate solutions, but we won't stay forever. A couple of items. Did we send the Friday voting list or not? No. We have a tentative Friday voting list. We do not know what Friday brings. The Senate President said we may have 2 sessions. Veto overrides are Friday. I know a number of them will be debated. So it could get somewhat contentious or debate on the floor. There might be other reports as well. So one, we don't know if there'll be a second session. So if we did 12 to 2 and 3 to 5, it doesn't leave us too much time for voting. The other variable, obviously, is weather. We don't know if there's going to be significant weather or not. So even the second session or even first session could be affected. So far, at least in my neck of the woods, has been like an inch and a half at most. So we are going to put forth a small voting list for Friday. you'll get tomorrow, but we're going to have to play it by ear. So just keep Friday open. Senator Washington, do you have a class at 5 o'clock that night?
No, they're doing asynchronous this Friday. I
Okay.
anticipated.
Okay, so keep Friday open. If we don't get to a voting session on Friday, we'll move it to next week. I don't know if we'll have 1 or 2 voting sessions next week. Questions on that? Okay. The Climate Solutions Bill, Senator Carrozza raised questions about better understanding it. And my proposal is that we spend some time, maybe we can do up to 45 minutes or less if needed. We won't take amendments tonight. We will either prepare amendments for Friday or next week so we have more time. I don't want to rush people. But as was said by the vice chair the other day, we had a bill twice as long on Kerwin and we spent about 4 hours on it, I think. We had 1 or 2 sessions on that. So I don't want anyone to feel rushed. I want to be able to ask questions so they can prepare amendments. So if you pull that up on your screen or if you have a hard copy of the bill, we're going to go page by page. We're not going to read each page. We're just going to see the new language. And if people have questions, we'll try to address those questions. We have some experts on a couple of the sections available to answer questions. So we're going to start walking through this.
Do you want to do it kind of front to back?
Yes.
Yeah.
So let's go to page 8. Lines 28 to 32 are 2 of the markers the bill does, which we did previously with the 2016 bill, where we passed a bill calling for 40 by 30. So that's in line 28 to 29. It calls 60% reaching by 2030. And the baseline is 2006, which has been in statute for a pretty long time. Senator.
How are we doing on achieving the goal through 2016?
The original goal from the 2009 bill was 25% by 2020. And I believe the department has said we have reached that or exceeded that. They have said we're on par to do greater than 40%. Actually, MDE is, I think, publicly going to call for a 50% reduction. This pushes the envelope further because, in my mind, science says we have to move much more rapidly. And I think the 20 by 45 net zero is somewhat in line with, I think, the president and a number of other IPCC and a number of other groups, scientific groups. Question? Yeah, please.
So to follow up on your last statement, so the 2045, is that why you came up with that year? Because those other groups are looking at that particular year? I just was wondering how you came up with a 2045 date. How or why you came up with that particular year?
And some other people, the IPCC, which is the international group of scientists from every country who represent 99.9% of the scientists who work on this, say if it gets beyond a 1.5 centigrade increase, it could be no turning back. In other words, even if we do better, you have the ice shelves start to melt, sea level starts to rise, and we're never going to recapture them. You may have seen the news clip of India earlier this week, where a whole piece of ice came off a mountain and flooded, and it could be 200 people dying, and they attribute it to the melting of the ice in at least in the mountains in India. So this is what I'm trying to follow: the science, not wishes or hopes, and these are generally the accepted numbers by the science community.
Okay. I had some questions on like electric grid questions. Should I hold those for right now and let you go a little farther along?
Yeah, I think we're going to get
Because
there.
they kind of relate to that year, too, the 2045. Okay,
If we don't cover it as we go forward, remind us to come back to it, Senator.
thank you.
Okay, let's go to page 9. I'm sorry, Senator Carosa.
Okay, I'm trying to just kind of make sure I understood what happened back with the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I know that the history of this is that was established by executive order, right? And then that commission came up where we actually moved forward with legislation wasn't until 2015, is that correct? And then we're changing those numbers from what the commission recommended? I know that you have lived it, and I'm just trying to understand the history here.
2009, I think in 2009, we had the first bill which called for a 25% reduction by 2020. It had the support of the administration, and that bill passed, and we used a 2006 baseline. The bill said we had to revisit that legislation or it would sunset. And in 2016, if I have this right, we had revisited it and saw the goals were too low and would leave us way behind. And at that point, we put into law a 40% reduction by 2030.
We did that
now,
in 2015.
along the way, the Climate Commission was formed, which makes recommendations but doesn't set policy. And as someone who served on it, there's frequently disagreement. At the end of the day, it's a commission that's heavily weighted by whatever administration is in power. They appoint 10 or 12 or 13 of the 25 positions, the secretaries. So the plan that the commission was supposed to have is a year and a month late. And there's been debate on the commission of what some of these goals should be. I believe even they have realized 40% was too low, and I think the Department of the Environment is going to suggest 50%. I believe science says it's not enough, or we're going to have a problem, and more flooding and a lot of other problems. So that's why this number is there.
Okay, so that explains the number from 40 to 60%?
Yes, 40% is in the law now, correct.
Okay, and then...
And prior to that, it was 25, so at one point 40 replaced 25.
It's a different recommendation from the Maryland Commission on Climate Change, correct?
Well, I'm not sure they've ever finished their plan, which was due over a year ago, but from what I hear, they're going to be suggesting 50%, which is different from what the law says.
And then I just wanted to better understand the 2045 number.
Right. In other words, 40%, 60% is compared to 2006, the reductions. This calls for 2045 is our ultimate goal that we have to be carbon neutral by 2045. So either we have to be more energy efficient, we got to come up with clean energy, we have to find new technology, but at the end of the day, any carbon put into the atmosphere must be counterbalanced with other savings. So it's a net zero by 2045.
And who have we worked with to see if that's even achievable?
Well, it's 2021. I think we didn't know if 25% was the right number in 2009 or 6, and we realized it was a stupid number, and it would put us in the dark ages very quickly. So the more science available, the more we learn. So is it a static thing? No. I mean, if all of, Ocean City gets lost to water in the next 10 years, I think we'll know we got to be more drastic. But most scientists who specialize in this, and not the deniers, but most respected scientists around the country and the world are saying this is the number we have to shoot for. Can this be changed? obviously it can. And in fact, the bill calls for a sunset. If our numbers are off target, we got to come back to the legislature in 2025, I believe, and legislate this. And if people say your numbers are too fast or too slow, the legislature can reassess. Okay. Question? Okay, moving on to page 9. This redefines some terms, but the yeah, this is on the middle of the page, 15 through 24 or 27. It defines high-performance buildings, but it says that school buildings are excluded from that definition of high performance. But what it does say is, okay, then it also, in line 20 says, subject to the availability of funding from the Net Zero School Loan Fund, which comes later, at least one of the next 5 schools built in each jurisdiction must meet net zero energy requirements. What that means is either through energy efficiency, solar on the roof, geothermal, whatever, they have to be net carbon. Howard County, I believe, just built 2 schools. Is it Howard County or Baltimore County? I think Howard County just opened 2 new schools. And then on line 28 to 30, it says schools, newly built schools that are not immediately net zero energy must be built to be solar ready so that they can add solar panels at a later date. Now, I must tell you, a number of people said this is not aggressive enough. They said all schools should be, but we'll take that up during the amendment process. Now, so people understand, if a school puts solar on the roof, there's an upfront cost. But they make money in energy savings some point later. It goes anywhere from 6, 7, or 8 years. So in other words, some point in the future, they not only have paid for the solar, but from then on, for the next 20 or 30 years of life of the school, they're actually saving money in energy costs. So the schools and the school system save money by doing this. Okay, Senator Carrozza.
I'm trying to take the sections and looking at some of the opposition testimony that came in, since we didn't have the oral testimony, so going through a lot of the written testimony, and I'm sure you've had an opportunity to look at it, the issues that are raised by the Association for Commercial Real Estate on the first page of their letter, their testimony, where it says zero energy new construction, I'm looking at...
Comes later. There's a section on new construction. This is about schools.
Okay, this is just about schools? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to page 10. If you look at line 8, it says, subject to the availability of funds in this loan, shall make available no interest loan to cover the local share of extra costs that may be incurred. It's a loan, so ultimately the school system has to pay it back. They don't have to use this loan. They can use their own money to pay for it. And as I said, at some point, they're going to start making money off of this deal. The more schools they bring into net zero or solar, the more their fuel cost will go down. So ultimately, they will save money and obviously help the environment. Please.
If it's a zero interest loan, why would they want to use their own money?
Justice community and sustainable communities. It does not, yes, Senator.
Justice, I was trying to look at the concerns that Mako raised about the schools, and so would that would have been in this section that we just went through. Mako's testimony that it places a significant burden on county governments to carry out a new state policy requiring that new school buildings be solar ready. And I guess they had some suggestions on addressing their concerns. I didn't know if you had looked at their...
Yeah, they don't want to do it. Basically, these are buildings that have not been constructed yet. And it would say that going forward, you have to have the architect do it so the roofs can take solar panels. You know, they have to use more efficient windows. There may be a little heavier upfront cost, but they get payback and will actually make money and will help the environment. And as we know, a lot of people like the status quo and don't like to change. But when it's been done, it's been very successful. Prince George's has a couple schools. Howard County has another couple schools. I think Baltimore actually might have one or two. So I think this train is moving, and they just are happy with the status quo.
But they're bringing up cost issues, correct?
Right, but I've just mentioned there are two ways to handle this. One, this is a cost savings. I don't know how else to put it. If you have solar, you don't have to buy gas or fuel or coal-fired power. It's based on the sun. I don't know. And if you put energy-efficient windows in the first place, it saves the cost. We have something called Empower that finance has passed, that Senator Riley probably has followed, that does just this to increase energy efficiency. Middle or bottom of page 10. This does not deal with who should be on the Environmental Justice Commission. I've left that to the work group that Senator Griffith chaired to make changes to the Environmental Justice Commission, which has been moribund for the last 5 or 10 years. What it does do is on page 12, the bottom of page 12, well, starting on line 5 in page 12, it gives some charges and direction to the commission. It says on line 5, they have to develop a methodology for identifying communities disproportionately affected, develop recommendations for environmental justice concerns, reduce emissions, et cetera. You can read that yourself, line 7 through 10. And in line 11 to 13, figure out percentage of investment in those communities that have been underfunded and overrepresented when it comes to smog and emissions. So that's on the top of 12. And the bottom of 12 basically repeats those. And page 13 also talks about how to pursue these charges on the commission. And then that it should be reported back to the whole legislature in terms of what has been done to mitigate the effects on poor minority, black and brown communities. That's page 12 through the bottom of 13. Moving on to page 14. Yep.
Quick question on that. Recommendations for the Environmental Justice Commission. So, myself and Senator Patterson sat on that President's Work Group, and I know we have some solid recommendations to kind of bring life back into that commission. But I'm not sure if there's a bill that is out there that will do that. Have you had discussion with Senator Griffith about that as far as, and is there a bill out there?
I'm sorry. We talked regularly over the summer and the fall.
Yeah, okay.
She kept me apprised of what you were doing. I kept her apprised. I didn't want to undercut the work of the special group, but because of the bad history of not much getting done and the department just seeing it as an afterthought, I wanted to give at least some direction to the kind of things it should do, because I didn't want the ball to drop. So I shared this with her. I've shared the language. This is not a ceiling but a floor. There are some things they just have to do. They have to see how these communities were affected environmentally, what kind of investment they have to make. I'm not saying what the answer is. I'm just saying they have to explore these questions. I'm not on the commission. So if there's another vehicle that we want to put this on, I just didn't want it to go unsaid that in addressing climate, we were ignoring environmental justice.
Right. I understand what you're saying. And I think my point and my concern is that, that work group addressed the composition of the commission. And so I want to know if, and maybe I could find out later, but I was wondering if you were aware if there's a bill out there now to address those concerns from the commission as far as the makeup of the commission.
Senator Elfrith's bill, and let me see if I can find the bill number for you, but it is out there.
We haven't heard it yet.
Okay.
It's been scheduled for the next week or two.
Okay. So that would empower the commission to be in a position to do the things that you want to do here in your bill.
And plus other things. I mean, I don't want to limit them. I hope they'll take on the world because a lot of these issues have been ignored. But at a minimum, these are things they need to come to grips with.
Okay,
And
thank you.
It's Senate Bill 674. We're hearing it on February 24th.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Just trying to understand page 12, lines 28 through 31, where it talks about the proportion of the funding, and which exact funding is that referring to?
To mitigate the effects of climate change and greenhouse gases.
So, does that include the trees and the schools? Is it everything in this bill, or does it go beyond this bill?
This bill, and there's a provision later in the bill that actually specifically requires MDE as part of the annual report from the Maryland Commission on Climate Change to sort of assess the amount of state funding that is going towards climate-oriented initiatives, and then to determine what percentage of that is going towards these environmental justice communities. This has been part of, there's been a broader conversation around this issue in things like the Transportation Climate Initiative, this group of states that Maryland may or may not be participating in setting up, some sort of carbon trading program and the money generated from that, and a lot of concern from environmental justice communities of sort of that's potentially a regressive tax, and how are they going to sort of make sure that money being generated by that is flowing towards projects that benefit the communities that have been disproportionately affected by climate change and environmental justice issues.
I fully support the intent of the language. I just wanted to know where that money, physically was. I didn't want to be saying that, something that wasn't kind of like funded. So that helps. Thank you.
Moving on to page 14, this deals with solid waste landfills and deals with methane. Methane is now measured at most landfills with a handheld kind of operation, but in recent years they're actually testing it from the atmosphere, from airplanes, which is much more accurate and usually has shown there's a lot more methane being released. So this essentially says if the testing that's being done under MDE's auspices is very different from the numbers they're getting from the atmospheric readings, there's a process in place to try to put that information together and deal with this discrepancy. And maybe the landfills have to start changing how they judge methane release. Methane is 50 times worse than carbon dioxide, so that's what this tries to do. Yeah.
Line 11 and line 22 on page 14, it talks about municipal solid waste landfills. Could council clarify, does that cover county landfills? And is there such a thing as private landfills, and would they be covered? Or is it literally just those in our 157 cities and towns?
But it's a defined term, and I know we were pretty careful about which terms we were using, but I'll check.
Yeah, and if we need language to deal with it more clearly. Senator Ellis.
Yes, sir. And Vice Chair, what page and line was that county landfill you referred to, please? I missed that. 14.
Page 14, line 11 and line 22, it talks about municipal solid waste landfill. And to me, that's a city or town, but council has indicated that that might be a term of art already in the law books, and it might mean something else. So that's why I was just worried.
Yeah, my intent was to capture county landfills
as
well.
Because Montgomery County is a county one. I don't know that there are municipal ones.
So we will check on that, and if we have to redefine it, we'll get an amendment.
Okay.
And then if there are private landfills also.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Be landfills that already in operation, or are you talking about new landfills that come on board?
Both. I think it's essentially saying any landfill has to do these methane release tests, whether they're in existence now or prospectively. It's a requirement, I think, of MDE. So it's saying that any methane test that a landfill practices or holds has to be cross-filed with the atmospheric readings. And if they're saying, oh, it's only a 5% emission into the air, and the airplane's saying you're way off base, it's 25%, MD's got to look at that, and they got to deal with that. Because we don't want too much methane leaking from these landfills.
So where would these reports go? Would they go to the respective jurisdictions so that the public would know the outcome of some of these levels of methane?
Well, on line 16, we say it's got to publicly disclose it on the website. And any discrepancy in line 22 must be reported to the landfills. I mean, you might want to mark it if you want an amendment of further reporting on that.
So this would eliminate the need to have direct input from the community as to how these fields might be impacting that quality of life?
Right now, it's to collect data. Because methane is so dangerous to the air, and we've had reports from at least one landfill that I know of in Prince George's County where the on-the-ground reading that they have to do, I don't know if it's annually or biannually, whatever, was far less than what the airplane was reading. So right now, I didn't want to overreach. I first wanted to find out if there were discrepancies and us deal with the discrepancies, and maybe if we see consistently these land level readings are way too low, maybe we tell MD to dump them because they're not accurate. So it's not going to solve all the problems. It's taking a step.
Last question. Since most of these things apparently seem to be in black and brown communities, will consideration be given to that population of people once we get involved in all this testing? No?
I mean, in this section, we don't do all the remedies. I mean, the one in Largo, it's a majority African American. It's a middle class community. It's been there for years and years and years. I think in the section we just talked about that Senator Ellis brought up about environmental justice, it'll touch on that. But this section was simply to get the data. Because I don't know where landfills are in Montgomery County. I just don't know.
I'd like to take you down to my district to show you a couple, okay?
I'm sorry? Yeah, it's a statewide policy.
Okay.
We got to make sure we're not getting BS.
I'm very sensitive about this because
I
think
understand.
it's an area that has too long been overlooked.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So this discussion of methane and landfill. So I know at least one landfill in my district that it's closed, and so you pass by certain times, you can see it's flaring off, they're burning, I guess. So would this address issue like that as far as, the technical aspects? So we look at burn off that methane. Is that a good environmental solution? Is that bad? Do we make a position on that? Will they have to address things like that or study the data collected? Would you look at individual landfill and practices to measure the greenhouse gases emitted, whether it's just let out in the air or it's burnt off or anything like that?
I'm going to start trying to answer that. I'm going to give it to the committee council. There are already policies in the law books about capturing methane. We're only a third of the way through, and I've tried to touch on many things. A lot of people have said, it's too big a bill, you're covering too many things. So this did not try to solve all the issues around landfills in this section. It was just to capture the more accurate methane data. But I know one landfill where they capture it and use it for energy. I mean, we can't help. So far, we have not been able to stop the methane, but it's been captured and utilized for other purposes.
Right. All I would add is the methane piece of this, it only has to do with, right now, landfills are already required to do monitoring of the gases that come off. There's some indication that that those ground level readings are not very accurate, that you can actually get a better, more accurate picture of the methane emissions from these aircraft observations. All this would say is, all the bill says is that in the case where airplane observation data exists and it's showing much higher emissions than the ground level readings, then the landfill operator needs to take a look at how they're doing their ground level readings and figure out why they're not noticing the emissions that are suspected. That's all. It doesn't have to do. It does not get into these larger questions. You're right about, how do you mitigate those emissions, or what's the best way to deal with the health effects or any of that.
Yeah, Senator, look, this is not going to cover every issue in every bill. Other bills, there are 3,000 bills. There may be bills needed on landfills. We know Senator Patterson has one or two. So I just didn't feel I could cover everything, that's all.
Understand, and this is, you can't regulate something you don't understand. So I understand that. So I
And
just
I'm a
want to make
novice. I had to make phone calls even for this.
Yeah. So I know the problem exists, so I hate for us to just study and collect the data. So I would keep that on my radar screen as far as, as we progress with this. Thank you.
Just one last question, I guess, for April. So the owner would be the one that the aircraft staff would go to determine what level this is, or they would be required, are they going to get some type of report that outlines where they are, and then they got to come up with a plan of action for corrective action, up or down, in terms of the methane? I'm just wondering, are we going to leave all this in the hands of the judge and the jury, which might be the same person?
It's really about. This is just about what what the bill says is that it's the Department of the Environment. They're the ones who get this aircraft data. Right now, the aircraft data is largely coming from the University of Maryland. They've been doing these flyover sort of emissions or greenhouse gas data collection processes, and they were the ones who sort of figured out that, like, hey, we're getting data that indicates that these landfills are giving off much higher levels of methane emissions than, the landfills themselves are the ones who are required to do the ground level observations. So all this would do is it says, if the department finds out that there's this aircraft data that's showing that there's higher levels, they have to go back to the landfill operator, and the landfill operator has to sort of account for it. They have to figure out why the data discrepancies are so big.
And that's my concern, but that's enough for today. I'll revisit this another time.
Senator, I can simply tell you, I've met an atmospheric professor at the University of Maryland who's involved with these flyovers. And he told someone they saw a big plume of methane. I don't know if it's a color or data. And they investigated with the Largo landfill, Brown Station landfill. Mm-hmm. And the numbers Brown Station was reporting were far different from what they were getting. That MDE, I don't know how frequently they do these flyovers. Mm-hmm. And that's what prompted this. And I just wanted to start to address it. It will not address all landfill problems. Okay. Senator Ellis.
This is an important issue, and so I appreciate your taking my question. Thank you, April, for telling us that a lot of this data is collected by University of Maryland. And did I understand you correctly that this data, Maryland, their researchers have planes flying around and detecting that methane at the higher level? Did I hear you correctly with that?
Only recently. I mean, the Department of Environment still relies on ground level testing at all the landfills. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the last couple of years, there have been grants, I believe, to try to do it atmospherically. And it's slowly being phased in. Mm-hmm. And I've heard discrepancies. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to deal with that.
Yeah, so we have data coming in now of the discrepancies by a state research institution. They have data saying this is it. So, this bill, my concern is we talk about specifics in certain areas, like planting all these trees. That's very specific action. If we know the data exists, this problem out there about methane, I would like us to maybe consider something specific, action to do about the methane. If the university have the data, because this problem affects asthma and especially African American, Latino communities, poor white communities like in Brandywine area, Pisgah area in Charles County, and that's where these landfills are and these polluting sites. So, I would really want us to really put some solid action in this bill to really address that issue instead of saying, just study that. I mean, because I think the time is now to really act on this. The disparities are there. Folks are just dropping dead because of these comorbidities because of COVID, more so than others. And so, I mean, I'm fully supportive of what this is doing, but maybe we can, in addition to looking at planting, millions more trees, maybe we can look at grabbing that data that exists and put something in there in this bill solid to really mitigate the problem with exhaust from these landfills.
I would suggest you either sit down with a committee council or call the amendment room and explain what you want, and we can take up any amendments. If there's some things to strengthen it, bring it up to the committee, and if there's some things we can do to strengthen this part of the bill, we should do it.
Okay, I'll follow up and get the name of the contacts at University of Maryland with their data and see what data they have, and from that we can maybe go forward with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. 15, line 16 says it sets the state on a path towards achieving 2045 net zero greenhouse gas, and then it calls for a plan in 2030 as a midway point before we get to 2045. This is just a timeline with reports, so we know if we're ahead or falling behind. On page 16, and this came about because of some of the misactions of the Climate Commission, where in their original plan, they said that road widening, the Beltway and 270, and having 10, 20, 50, 100,000 more cars would actually decrease greenhouse gases. And their rationale was there'd be less idling because there would be these high occupancy lanes where you pay your $20 or $30 or $40, and they paid a consultant who came up with this. So it says they can't use road widening, they can't use carbon capture unless it's scientifically verifiable, and on methane they have to use a 20-year horizon, not a 100-year horizon. So some of these things have been played with fast and loose in the commission, and these put some guardrails. Yeah.
So on the road widening, and I'm not really familiar with this data, but is the reason they put that in there because you have most of the emissions come out from like stop and start when you start also. So I have a hybrid car, so when it takes off, it's not burning that much. Once you get running, it's not as bad. Is that why the road widening was put in there, because you keep cars moving and they're not having to stop, start up, and that's when they're blowing that emissions out more?
This is primarily, right now, the major road widening proposal is the Washington Beltway on the northern side and Route 270 going from the Beltway through Montgomery County up to Frederick. And there's been this major proposal, billions and billions of dollars, to add toll lanes. And at the same time, the governor has been pushing these toll lanes, which will bring many more cars and more lanes. In the Climate Commission plan, there's some section that says they think they'll reduce greenhouse gases because there'll be less idling. And I have to tell you, 80% of the people who attended that meeting when that was briefed laughed, because it's true, when you're idle, emissions come out. But if you add 10 or 20 or 50,000 more cars to the road, it's going to eat up that idling plus.
I'm not sure where you're coming up with that they're going to add that amount of cars. Was there intention to add cars, or just to be able to move along more quickly with more space the cars that are already traveling there?
Thank you for the question. So it's a bit of a build it and they will come. So traffic in 270, which includes Rockville and Gaithersburg, traffic can be pretty deadly. And people are really done with the idea of sitting, and Metro has not always been as reliable and affordable an option as we would ideally like, although it's a great option, and without it, it would be even worse. The concern is that the goal of widening would solve it for a little, but then more people would say, oh, I can get to work even faster, so I won't take Metro, or I won't do other options, or telework, I'll get in my car. So it will pretty quickly reach capacity and over some and not actually solve the problem.
You touched on my next point or question. With now, with the COVID pandemic, we've had so many people that are, for the first time, are, they're working from home, and I potentially a lot of companies, if it works for them, you might have a lot of folks that keep working from home and potentially could have a less traffic due to that. So has that been considered in this legislation, that maybe that'll help with the problem, and an unintended, possibly good consequence, maybe a little tiny bright spot in this otherwise dark world of COVID?
I think we all hope it will. But this project has not stopped that the Department of Transportation has been promoting on the Beltway to the Virginia Bridge, Legion Bridge, and up 270. So I agree with you. I'm hoping there's fewer people in cars. And the other thing, and Senator Ellis knows this so well, there have been a number of people who've been pushing for more mass transit up from Charles County instead of getting stuck on roads, whether it's a train, whether it's bus lane, whatever, and rebuilding the MARC and having more MARC trains and a lot of things. And that's taking place in another separate process called the TCI, but they're slow going on that. So we wanted to make a point that while this toll lane is being initiated, they were trying to justify the toll lane in here by saying road widening was a good process that helps the environment. Obviously, you can move to take it out when we take up amendments. I mean, any amendments will be welcome. Okay. Top half of the page is still on the methane. And then we also call for an economic benefit analysis, including the social cost of carbon. So we need to know what the implications are for us when carbon is emitted. Does it save us money? Does it cost us money? Are there downstream costs associated with it? Okay, I'm going to, page 19, just like this sets up what's called a just transition work group. And this work group is to look at the effects that shifting from the old technology, oil, coal-fired power plants, gas, how that is affected by shifting to new, clean, green energy. What does it do to the workers? Will it put people out of work? And those charges are on page 20 and 21. Identify new generating facilities, the impacts on the workforce, how do we retrain people? It's taking a broader view and getting everyone at the table. Labor, management, community colleges, the state government, and having and the environmentalists to have the conversation where they're not fighting each other but looking for solutions, so we're not just simply running into a new wall and leaving people behind. So the makeup is on 19 and 20, and the charge to the group is on 21 and the top of 22, and then they are to report back to the commission and the full General Assembly. That's on the top of 22. Questions? Senator Carosa.
So I'm going through the testimony, the written testimony of the Maryland State and DC AFL-CIO and also the Mid-Atlantic Pipe Trades Association. And they've made a number of points about the just transition. And the Mid-Atlantic Pipe Trades Association says that they say the problem is it lacks in both areas with just transition. They pointed out if the government wants us to transition from fossil fuel, then the government should lead, and the fact that I guess some of the exemptions, and then they talk about you need to allow all renewable energy types like carbon capture and nuclear and not limit wind and solar options. And then I was looking at some of the other testimony, and it looks like there's a real concern about the job elimination. So I didn't know how you were addressing those concerns.
First of all, I did put in language after talking to them about carbon capture. I just said it had to be scientifically based. We were told during the 2016 election there was clean coal. That was not true and couldn't be proven. So I wanted to make sure that the carbon capture was scientifically based and quantifiable. In terms of the job situation, Senator Carosa, in some ways it's akin to tobacco. More and more science said tobacco killed people. And at the same time, we gave support for growing tobacco. And the question came, if we wanted to get fewer people to smoke tobacco and buy tobacco, then that means that industry was going to be affected. And unless we want to hold on to the status quo, even if it's killing people, it's going to mean some changes. So this transition work group was to discuss a thoughtful way to make those changes. Could jobs be affected? Yes. Should some people who are put out of jobs be given salaries for a year or two during the transition? Maybe so. But I didn't want to get into whether we needed $5 million or $500 million to make this transition. I wanted this group to do it.
And the amendments, the version of the bill you have is the interlineated version, and Senator Pinsky's proposed amendments are in this version. But if you look on page 21, that's one of the provisions that he proposes to add based off of some of that feedback is that, some of the feedback from the unions and the labor groups was that this working group was too focused on retraining and education, which may be fine if you're at the early stages of your career, but if you're in the later stages, you might not want to, or it might not really help you to go back to school so you can get a job as a, apprentice for 2 years before retiring. So added language requiring the work group to identify resources necessary to protect workers from economic insecurity, including options for maintaining or supplementing retirement and healthcare benefits for dislocated workers affected by the downsizing of the fossil fuel industries.
I mean, you see that language and it's reassuring, but then have we factored in the fiscal impact?
Well, and the purpose is for the working group to look at that and to sort of figure out, the idea of the working group is to study these issues more broadly, and they would be the ones who would make the recommendations and identify potentially resources that are available for that. This is, it's part of a larger conversation that's happening, with or without this bill. A transition is happening right now away from fossil fuels. So there is a broader conversation that is happening and needs to be had about people who are employed in those industries and what comes next for them.
Thank you. Half my question's been already answered. I know that you're working with the unions, Mr. Chair, and so I appreciate that. I wonder, per Senator Crow's, point, if they make a recommendation here for the retirement, and then we also make the recommendations for the disadvantaged communities, I wonder if we could just add like something around report and a revisit, so that we really make sure that we find that money when those reports come due.
You can offer an amendment. The sure thing to defeating this bill is to committing to $1 billion payout if that's what they come up with. No, I'm
a fan of the bill. I want it to pass.
No, I'm just saying if we, depending on the language, I mean, there are some people who said we should have put enough money in this bill to take care of the people who may be forced out of work, or one of the coal-fired power plants that's just closing, announced they're closing. And I said, I don't know how much it is. And the question came up, how do you define who's affected by the change in the sector? And that's a complicated question. And so I was a little nervous about putting money in, because I did the back of the envelope, and we're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And just to put this bill in its basic frame, is asking for $20 million, and I'm having to fight for that. So please consider amendments. It's just a very difficult position if we say we're also committing in the future. We got to report back. I mean, this group, we have a quick report back so we know the implications. But if we're too explicit on committing to the future money, at least me personally, I get nervous. That's all. Okay, let's try to get through one section. We'll stop. Let's go to the building. There are two sections on buildings. There's new construction. We're on 23, but I just want to give you the overview. There's new construction, and there is large renovations. So there are two categories, and it's private and public, if anything. But in both cases, we say the buildings have to be 25,000 square feet or larger, which some people say you're exempting out 80% or 95% of the businesses or apartment buildings. So that's a question we can talk about. You can see on 23, on line 26, it says 25,000 square feet. It defines solar ready. And then on 24, it says this section applies only to new construction. Line 7, the department shall adopt regulations establishing energy conservation requirements for covered buildings. And then it sets a timeline, a phased-in timeline. By 2026, it's got to be a 30% energy conservation. By 2029, 40% in new construction only. By 2032, 60%, and net zero by 2033. And if a county has already adopted more stringent, they can be allowed to do it. This is a floor, not a ceiling. And let me give you context for this, ladies and gentlemen. Well, no, let me stop. Yeah. Yeah.
You want to finish?
Yeah, let's finish.
Yeah.
And again, it calls for them being solar ready if they're at least 20 stories in height, 20,000 square feet. But it allows for getting a free pass if they are shaded or their structure prohibits being able to put the solar panels. That's on page 25. Let's cover the last piece, and that is the renovations. On 26, it says what a major renovation is, and we say a major renovation is 50% of the assessed value. So it's probably going to be millions of dollars on a 20-story building. There probably aren't a lot of them. And some people are saying it's too lenient a standard. That's on page 26. And it says, if you're going a major renovation, the renovated building has to show 40% reduction in average use or 20% higher than the national standard. And the final thing in this section, and I'll stop, is the department shall adopt life cycle analysis, which means if you are building a building, you're buying a house or building a house, they need to have a model to show that if you do this kind of power and electric, it'll cost this much and you'll save this much. If you use this type of power or electric, you'll save or pay this much. And it doesn't have to be house by house, it's a model. So people, builders, purchasers will be able to look at which way to go in what they buy as to how it will affect their energy costs. And let me just, final word. The Empire State Building went through a multi-million, I think tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars renovation. The biggest, or next to the biggest, building in New York City. They got the best minds, they got the best builders, and the owners said, if you can show us we're going to get a return on investment, we'll do it. They have found they have reduced energy by 40%, 40%. And they actually are expecting to get the investment return in savings by the end of 5 years. Now, 5 years is pretty tight, so we put 15 years. And if they can show they can't get their money back in 15 years and start saving money, they get exempted. And a lot of these ideas came from the Maryland architects, and they were stakeholders in this process. That's as far as we're going to go today. We'll take a couple of questions, then we'll adjourn. Please, Senator.
Thank you. First question, I kind of had three little questions about this section. One is Senator West had a bill that we heard, and I just wonder, is this complementary? Is it different? Which is more stringent? Do you know, April?
They're different. Senator West is specifically about solar power. So Senator West's bill is specifically about solar power, I believe.
It was solar. It was solar panels like this,
Solar
and it was
panels.
similarly large, 20 or 25,000 square feet. It was something similar.
Right. And so that was actually a conversation that in drafting this bill that we had with the architects. Initially, I think in the approach in last year's Climate Solutions Act bill was more along those lines of requiring solar panels on large buildings. The conversation that sort of surrounded that was that the architects advised that you can get more bang for your buck by going after energy efficiency and allowing the building designer to sort of figure out what is the best way to achieve energy reductions. In some places, it might be putting solar panels on the roof. In other places, you might actually kind of get more bang for your buck in terms of energy reductions by taking other efficiency measures. And so they're different is the bottom line.
Yeah. The thing I've learned about is geothermal, where they put it underground where it's 55 degrees, and then you only have to heat it to 70 or cool it to 70 when it's 5 degrees outside. And so some people are trying to do geothermal. That might get a better saving. So we want to leave a little flexibility.
Got it. Next question. Am I on? Okay. Next question, line 28 on page 25 is not residential. Just curious, can you speak to why you wanted to exempt such a large segment of large buildings?
Yeah, that was a commercial building is not residential. But we have covered buildings, residential multifamily buildings.
We do have that later on.
That's on the next page, line 2 and 3.
Okay.
Now, but I did exclude, somebody suggested requiring every new home, detached home, to have solar, and I didn't want to go that far. But it's for multifamily. Look, high rises, commercial apartment buildings, we're going after them first.
Mr. Chairman, also on page 25, lines 25 and 26. Commercial building means a building that is used primarily to carry on a for-profit or nonprofit business. If you can just speak to any financial support, incentives, loans. Some of the nonprofit businesses might be a hospital or something that can be successful right away, but some of them might be more challenged by the requirements, the upfront cost of investing in solar panels, even though down the road, within 5 or 15 years, that it will yield benefits.
Right. Let me start, and then I'll give it to Ms. Morton. I mean, we need to step back and remember that these are buildings of 25,000 square feet when they're either built or when they're renovated. So it's not a decision made. It could have 20 companies in that building. So it's really on the builder and the developer rather than all the individuals. So, our belief is ultimately their energy costs will go down. But in terms of we had to if you put for-profit, it's nonprofit, because there could be, 500 square feet for a nonprofit. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
April, is there anything you would add?
Just that there is, the bill does not, for these provisions, include financing provisions.
I'm going to check in a little bit on that and may have something to add when we talk about this bill again. Thank you.
Senator Hester and then Senator Carozza.
Just on the Vice Chair's last point, I believe that the bill that we voted favorable with amendment, the Clean Energy Loan Program this morning, that allows you to take any of these improvement costs, either building or refinancing for a specific energy improvement or renewable energy cost, and put it into the mortgage, so that hopefully that you could, as you'd pay off your mortgage, but then also the energy savings would go down. So it would spread both out over the 15 years of the program.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, I'm going back to page
Hester, could you hit your mic?
24, I just want to first understand the ramifications under the new construction. And I think most of us know that the commercial real estate has taken a huge hit during COVID-19, and we still don't know today. We have been focused on this immediate COVID-19 relief, as we should be, but there's also an entire focus that we need to have on what long-term recovery looks like for all sectors and all businesses. So as I'm trying to understand what long-term recovery looks like for the real estate industry, the commercial real estate industry that was particularly hard hit, I'm trying to then transfer that to looking at what it means for new construction. So I want to better understand when we say new construction, what that means, and then the renovation. And I'm specifically, I'm trying to go back and look at the new construction language on page 24 and the issues that I think there were very significant issues that were raised by the Association for Commercial Real Estate and the realtors, given that I believe they were much more involved in this process in the past and less so this time around. So, and I mean, I understand that because part of it is they're trying to, with COVID-19, focus on their very survival. But I'm trying to see the issues they raise and what you've outlined under this new construction, what that means for them.
Well, the bill basically forces them to save money. Ultimately, they will have more energy efficient buildings. And look, how many of them are going to build 25,000 square feet buildings in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years when there's all this vacancy? It's probably not going to affect them at all for the foreseeable future. But when they do, to save the state, the country, and the planet, they've got to take certain steps, which in fact will save them money. That's what this does. And if the Empire State Building can do it, I think a building in Baltimore or Rockville can do it.
So looking at this on page 24, when we go through these different phases, and again, just trying to figure out how this affects individuals who are building these buildings. So this requirement, they have to demonstrate with new construction that the 30%, what do they have to demonstrate to meet that?
New building they construct will be 30% more energy efficient than the International Energy Conservation Code.
Right. And to interject here, essentially what this does is it requires the Department of Labor, which is the body responsible in the state for establishing the state's building and energy codes. Essentially, this sets up sort of a separate new energy code that is specific to these larger commercial structures that and kind of tightens that energy code over the course of this kind of step down period. So just like right now when somebody builds a new commercial building, it has to meet energy efficiency standards established in the Maryland Energy Code. This would I won't say just, but this would essentially require the Department of Labor to tighten up those efficiency requirements for these larger buildings over this phased-in period. So it's the department that would be setting the standards. It wouldn't be up to the commercial building person to figure out what a 20% reduction looks like. It would be up to the department to say, okay, here is the new, energy use standard for these buildings beginning in, 2026 or whatever.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Either way you slice this pie, there's going to be a lot of new jobs, I think, that's going to be at hand here. And I was waiting to sort of dive into the section that will deal with procurement, but I noticed that's the next section on page 28. So I guess we will get more into the specific the next time, talking a little bit about procurement. So I just want to make sure all segments of the state, get a bite at the apple, so to speak, when jobs and financing and all these things start to fully develop. So this is a big project, but it's a needed project, and I'm still open, but this is going to be homework, and I'm sure we'll have some amendments along the way.
Yeah, Senator, it really doesn't get into procurement almost at all. I know we have 10 bills, and we're going to have another 10 bills on procurement. It talks about the expectations, requirements for the new construction. It doesn't say how they go about it. And I agree with you. I think it's going to create jobs. But I didn't want to micromanage how the private sector did their borrowing, spent their money, invested their money. So I basically, in this bill, because, again, it already has so many components, I didn't try to step into an area that I didn't feel I could handle or this bill could handle. So, and the other thing I would suggest, Senator Carrozza, Senator Patterson, is Senator Carrozza, you've mentioned concerns by the people who oppose it. It might be worthwhile looking at some of the testimony from the 30 or 40 people who submitted written testimony who support it to understand some of the issues and why they support it, including the architects, for example. So that might be helpful as you do your homework.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, but You'll recall with the hearing, we did have extensive oral testimony from the proponents and very limited from the oral presentations from the opponents. So there's a lot of catch-up. And really, literally, going through this, I think we have a responsibility to go through this section by section, first of all, to understand it before we could even offer amendments. And I'm really trying to understand the impacts of the individual sections. So I am trying to do my due diligence to look at the bill and then to cross-check it.
We're halfway through, although the other pages, many are just reprints of pages that don't change. So we will go through this on Friday or early next week and go through the rest of it. But people should start preparing amendments. We shouldn't wait too long on that. Senator Ellis.
Let me interrupt you. In this section, on page 25, talk about the commercial buildings. It talks about for-profit and non-profit. It exempts public use. So is that saying that a government building, a school that's going up, a public school, is exempt from these standards?
They're not covered by this section.
They're not covered.
They are covered, though, by the other section, which is the high-performance building section. So they're actually held to a higher standard. Under the bill, they would have to be net zero energy going forward.
So that's later on in the bill?
The general provisions are later in the bill.
Okay,
Yes.
great. All right, thank you.
Thank you for your patience. Get some dinner, get some rest. We're back at it tomorrow. We have hearings in the morning at 11 till 12:30, and then back again 1:30. I don't know how many bills we have. We have no voting planned for tomorrow. So with that, we're adjourned.